From the island of Kauai, greetings of the Spirit to the Spirit. I think I agree with you that we should continue our 8 p.m. meditations. And so every day at 8 p.m. California time, let us continue living in the mystical body, but let us change the subject. And if you will check the reverse side of this fourth tape, on the second half of it, I think we'll do the meditation for the month. And our subject will be transportation, air, land, and sea. Another brief announcement about the seminar. It would be suggested to you now that you consider sending in your reservations before July 29th rather than wait. And the reason is that the inn at Avila Beach has given us a block of rooms for the students. But after July 29th, those rooms that we have not reserved, they will start portioning out to other guests who may want to stay there. And also, if you do not plan to live at the inn during the seminar, at least let us know that you are coming, so that before July 29th, we can set aside the required number of chairs. We don't want you to be disappointed, and we want to be prepared for you. Now today, because we are one, because we can be frank with each other and must be at all times, we're going to have to talk about things that are usually skipped for fear of offending anybody. And to me, the greatest offense of all would be to bury the truth. So if it seems a little rough, it's what we all must do and what we all must face. We've got to learn to identify the excess baggage that stands in our way. Your second birth is the secret of your progress, the secret that all great religions have taught, and the secret that many orthodox religions have refused to accept. Second birth removes the veil of illusions. It gives you a completely new universe to live in, a new body, new eyes, new ears, so that you can experience the eternal creation of God. Second birth lifts you right here into the kingdom of God on earth. It takes you above the so-called material powers of the world, above human limitations. And you are no longer at the mercy of these strange world forces that have been beyond your control. In this awakened realm, you are released from the temporary sense of life. You are no longer bound by the temporary sense of body. And you are able to live consciously in your permanent self, which automatically takes dominion over the elements of land, earth, air, fire, water, the powers of the world. This necessary evolution in consciousness brings you under a new law, a divine law, a perfect law. And it also eliminates all possibility of experiencing human death. While still appearing on earth, you are transformed invisibly. You are made one in consciousness with the infinite spirit. And you are governed by divine grace even before you make your ascension in consciousness out of this world. Because spirit can read what is in your heart. Some of you who are parents know that our parents, as well as ourselves, have been unaware that our true function on earth, as parents that is to teach the mystery of second birth to our children and to attain it for ourselves. As a result of this, most of the human race today, practically all of it, is victimized by death and conditions that lead to death. And although this transformation in consciousness has been attained throughout the world by many students of ancient mystery schools, and has even been taught on earth for over 25,000 years, including a very special spiritual underground during the past 16 centuries. In spite of all this world has been dominated visibly by religious doctrines that have distorted the truth. We have to face that. The goodness of religion is not the goodness of God. Our material sense has buried and has obscured divine truth. And the spiritual doctrine, which we should have been learning, has been confused with human doctrines, scientific doctrines, religious doctrines, all having ignored spiritual truth. And it was not until, about 140 years ago, that the lost light was again rediscovered. And the seeds of a new spiritual age were planted. Today you see them blossoming all around you with vigor. And it is now possible, once more, for modern man to break the hypnotism that has confined him to a temporary lifespan in a temporary, imperfect body. First birth is your birth into mortal form. Second birth is your birth into immortal life and immortal form. And that is the mystical path of illumination which fulfills the will of God, restores the lost years of locusts, and lifts you into the glorious realm of Christ consciousness. You must have made the decision by now. And if necessary, you must make it again and again every day. And that is this. Are you spirit or are you flesh? Flesh is excess baggage. If you live as a fleshly organism, think as flesh, act as flesh, believe you and the world around you is made of flesh, you have accepted a temporary sense of life. You have accepted temporary pleasures, temporary security, temporary happiness. Your joys will be mingled with sorrows. Your successes in one direction will balance out by failures in other directions. And finally, all your possessions will be turned over to the probate court. And even the dear human body that you thought you were living in will be taken away. All you can take out of this world is your consciousness. Life in flesh is responsible for every tragedy of human existence, for every up and down, for every gain and loss. And even while we are lifted up by a sense of progress, we find that our lives in the flesh are not really free. We're dominated. We're held down by physical forces beyond our control. Our bodies are vulnerable. At times our health is not stable. Our pressures and responsibilities multiply. Our energies diminish. And that proud, unlimited vigor and enthusiasm of youth one day becomes punctured by a very sober realization that we're only beginning to repeat ourselves. We seem to have run out of options, and the newness of our lives loses its fine edge. We begin moving in grooves. We're held there by habit and necessity. Even our decisions are made for us by forces outside ourselves. And we may try to tell ourselves that we can conquer these forces, but we really know the truth, and it is that until we experience our permanent self, our permanent spiritual identity, until we evolve in consciousness from this temporary physical body to the mystical body of spirit that never dies, no matter what we do or say, we remain prisoners of the flesh. And we try to survive by building mortal lives that we know must end. Now that's the big sleep, and it's not for spiritual students. Here are some more sobering facts, the excess baggage that we want to get rid of. During this next minute, 1 minute, 108 human bodies will die. I know it's not a desirable subject, but it's more desirable to remove the possibility of death. It's important to know that every hour, 6,500 human bodies die. Every day, 156,000 human bodies die. Does it make you think a little bit about why? And then here's the big one. In this year 1979, which we think is part of a great scientific age, the age of satellites, the space age, in this year of 1979, 57 million human bodies will die. Again in 1980 and each year thereafter, another 57 million human bodies will pay the same price. And you and I, having no control humanly, will simply wait around with the rest of them until we too become dead statistics, unless we move into the second birth. Perhaps it would help to know why we die, from a different standpoint and medical opinion. Perhaps if we knew why we live under the constant fear of death, in the shadow of death, and under the fear of physical conditions, if we could understand the why of it, we would have an opportunity of overcoming it. Why, for example, if God is life, why do human beings die? Do you know what Paul said about that? He gave us an answer, a true answer. And it was so shocking, so beyond the concept of the human mind, that for the past 19 centuries, the mind of man has pretended that Paul never even said a word. Religions have actually put cotton in their ears. They have stuffed their ears so that they will not hear Paul's words. And you can say the same about educators and philosophers and scientists who have turned away, who prefer something less revolutionary, less disturbing than the truth. But Paul's words refuse to go away. And after every human scheme for survival or salvation has been tried, and the death rate continues, we will discover that however shocking Paul's words may have been, they were not his words at all. They were heaven sent. And they were sent to lead us into our permanent self, where the experience of death is impossible. If you live in human flesh, said Paul in Romans 8, verse 15, you must die. Nobody wants to hear that, do they? We'd rather go right on living in human flesh and dying. But I tell you, Paul knew whereof he spoke. And if you look closely at his words, if you live in human flesh, you must die. There's more there than meets the eye. Because Paul is saying, number one, that all human bodies are separated from God. And this separation has nothing to do with your goodness or your badness, with your youth or your old age. It doesn't make a difference at all if a body belongs to a minister of the church or a member of the mafia. If it's a human body, it will die. And death will always come under different disguises. But always, behind the symptoms that cause death, there is only one true underlying cause. And Paul said it in this statement: the natural man, that means the natural human body, receiveth not the things of God. Why doesn't the natural human body receive the life of God, the grace of God, the power, the love, and even the protection of God? Why do 108 human bodies die every minute and 57 million human bodies die every year? Face this now. It's important to your attainment of the second birth. The life of God is not in a human body. And the life of God does not animate a human body. The life of God does not sustain a human body. And all the religious prayers on earth cannot change these unalterable facts. Maybe you never really realized it before. But today, please do. And I think Joel is a good authority for us to follow at this point. And so let's take a peek at the book called Spiritual Interpretation of Scripture. Page 211. That wonderful chapter called The True Sense of the Universe. The secret, says Joel, which has been so rarely understood, is this. The life which you behold in man, tree, or animal, is not the life which is God. Human, animal, or plant life is not a manifestation of God, and therefore is not immortal, eternal, or spiritual. The life of material man or flower is mortal sense objectified. It is a false sense of life, a false sense of the life which is real. Now that's the same as Paul's statements, paraphrased another way. Do you really hear what Joel and Paul are saying? They are saying that the life of God is not in your human body. And they are saying that the life of God is not in the bodies of your children. And you cannot walk by on the other side. You've got to understand that and accept it. You've got to realize that because the life of God is not in your human body or in the bodies of your children, that those bodies are at the mercy of the false powers of this world. They are telling us why human hearts fail, why human brains suffer strokes, why human arteries harden, and why all human bodies are not divinely governed. They are giving you priceless information that every human body on earth is separated from God until the second birth. And as a parent, you must see that because of this truth, children are victimized by multiple sclerosis or muscular dystrophy only because their mortal bodies are separated from God. Now that's different than a scientific viewpoint or a religious viewpoint. That's a mystical viewpoint. And the deeper meaning is that even healthy bodies are separated from God. That humanhood itself, living in a human body, constitutes separation from God. And that separation continues right up to the moment of death, unless the individual conquers the illusion of flesh and attains the realization of his or her immortal, permanent body, his mystical body, which is made of divine life substance that never dies. That's why we're emphasizing that you must find your mystical body and live in it instead of in your human body. And the facts may be blunt, but without these facts, our entire human race has been paying the price of ignorance. While you are at home in the body, says Paul, you are absent from the Lord. Now what does at home in mean? It means while you are living in the body. And what does absent from the Lord mean? It means you are separated from God. Now that truth has been covered up. It has been covered up by ignorance in some form or another in the great minds of many of our leaders throughout the world. And literally that cover-up has pulled a shroud over the face of mankind. It has veiled the light of God from billions of worshipers who thought they were living in bodies created by God, who are unaware that immortal spirit, immortal God cannot create mortal bodies of flesh, and that immortal spirit, immortal God cannot enter into mortal bodies of flesh. This very day, 1,000 surgeons in this world will cut into 1,000 human bodies to repair them. And why do these bodies need repair? Because God did not create them. And because they are therefore separated from God. What God did not create is separated from God. In Chicago, why did 271 bodies fall out of the sky and 2 or 3 more on the ground join in the carnage? Because they were separated from God. Not one of these bodies, not one of these minds in these bodies knew how to be absent from the body, and therefore they were not present with the Lord. And that's all it would have required. One passenger, just one aware of the infinite mystical body of spirit, would have made that DC-10 safer than the lawn of the White House. Every human disaster on earth reveals the truth that the body of man is separated from God. The body of the human race is separated from God. Every disease, every discord of a human body emphasizes this breach. And this is that big sleep. Blindly. In our search for peace and survival, we have ignored this immovable truth. We pretend. We like to pretend that our bodies are images of God, that our bodies are created by God. We like to pretend that our human bodies can find the way to God. And we like to pretend that the power of God will lift us out of this chaos, out of confusion, out of hatred, fear, frustration, insecurity, out of war, out of radioactivity, out of terrorism, and out of the moral irresponsibility that pervades many quarters of the globe. We like to think that the 1,000 conflicts that control man against his will somehow be dissipated by divine power, that God will smile upon us and bless these human lives. But we are wrong. God will not help a human being. Face it, those who are in the flesh, those who are in human bodies, can never please God as long as they remain in human bodies. They can never even know God as long as they remain in human bodies. And they can never enter the kingdom of God. This is Paul's statement to mankind. Every individual still living in a human body, while declaring himself to be a born-again Christian, is denying Paul's statement, is denying this mystical instruction by the founder of more Christian churches on earth than any other man. We actually perjure the words of God if we teach the untruth. And the untruth is that anyone living in the flesh can please God. For as Paul says, as long as we are at home in the flesh, we are absent from the Lord. And that's how Paul identified the universal problem of man. But he also identified the solution to this problem. And it was not a hearsay solution, an untested solution. It is, in fact, the only solution that works. Because it is a solution that pleases God. It is a solution that enables us to know God. Whom to know? All right. Is life eternal, not death? And so listen carefully again to what Paul says about the solution. Awaken from mortality. Awaken from bodies of flesh. Awaken from bodies that die. Awaken from bodies that God did not create. Bodies that God does not respect. Bodies that can never walk in the creation of God or live under the grace of God. Rather, says Paul, should we be willing to be absent from the body and present with the Lord. Did you hear that word, willing? If you are unwilling to be absent from the body, you will remain absent from God, absent from the powers of God, absent from the love and grace of God, the eternal life of God. But if you are willing, then be assured that you have passed one of the greatest hurdles to union with God. Your willingness to be out of the body, not for a minute, not for a day, but to consciously eliminate the concept of human flesh, enables you to move into the great adventure of finding your eternal, deathless, painless, perfect, mystical body of spirit. Let's be still a moment. Before we move into lesson, I think it's 13. Yes, that was 12. Let's just hold a quiet. I think at this point, if we could stabilize and set down certain unchanging facts, that you could use these facts for meditation subjects. So, in lesson 13, when you go over it, take these facts one by one and make them individual meditations. I may run them together into a group of meditations as we have done several times before, but I think you'll know exactly what to do. The important part is that there are certain ground rules which must be observed if we are going to live consciously outside physical form. The first might be that no matter what you do, whether you live in physical form or not, there is an invisible you. And this invisible you is never going to die. Doesn't matter how much pain there is in the visible you, that pain is never in the invisible you. It doesn't matter if you find difficulties in this world, that if you are limited or lacking or unemployed or sick or divorced or whatever it might be, whatever upheaval comes, it's never functioning in your invisible self, your invisible life, your invisible body. That's fact number one. And so please, make that the subject of a meditation. Get to know your invisible self. You know how we are. We think of ourselves as minds and bodies, human organisms. And when you get through an entire day and look back at it, you find you behaved like a human being. You've tried to find ways to bring pleasure to the body and to dodge pains that might come to the body or problems. And you've moved into sleep. You are not body. You are not mind. You can see it better perhaps if you think of a rose bush putting out roses. And here's a dead rose now. You don't throw the rose bush away. And that's because you know that rose bush is going to put out more roses. In other words, you're not accepting the rose, you're accepting the life of the rose bush rather than the form of the rose. You enjoy the form of the rose, but you really are sowing to the life of the rose bush. You believe in it. You know that when the rose dies, the life of the rose bush remains alive. And we want to go even deeper with ourselves. When this form dies, your life remains alive. And deeper still, your life that remains alive is the life of God. And that possibly is your second fact. God is life. But God is all life. There is no other life. Now, a life that dies is not the life of God. When the life of your body dies, that is not the life of God dying. And so if that's the life you're living in right now, you're living in the wrong life. That's not your life. The life of your body is not the life of God, but you are. Meditate on this. The life of God is the life of you, and your authority for that is the Christ teaching that the only life there is the life of God. His life is the life of all men. You can thank John for that statement. Your life is the life of God, and even when the life of form is no more, your life is alive. So work until you are aware of the life of God as your life, and make the conversion so that you are living as the life of God and not as the life of this form. Until you do that, you can see you're separated from the life of God. in that separation from the life of God because of a consciousness which believes in only the life of your form, everything that God is denied to you. Just think if your blood was made of water instead of blood. Your body would need certain nutriments, and you couldn't get it out of water. You'd need blood. The life of God is your real blood. And if you're trying to live on water instead of blood, you have the cause of every human problem. Your God life is the only life there is, and the human sense of life is imitation. The light shining in the darkness is the life of God. It is your life. And it is eternal. It is unaffected by the things of this world. It is unaffected by inflation, unaffected by shortages, unaffected by discords and diseases. It is your life, though you may not have known it in your sleep. Awake from the sleep of a life that is not the life of God. Do not accept the life of this form as your life. That is the mystical truth number 2 that you must dwell with until you can shout it from the housetops. I and the Father are one life. The life of God I am. Thou couldst have no power over me. You can only have power over the false sense of me. God is invisible. God life is invisible. Your God life is invisible. And it is always alive. And if you have heard those words within your heart, you will know that today, this moment, you can sit still and trust that invisible God life to function as you. It is your source. It is your source of all that you will ever need from now unto eternity. It will never age. It will never weaken. It will never diminish. It is your true life. And it cannot work in you and for you if you are accepting the life of a human being. If you are separating yourself from it, you are living in that duality, which brings about those 157 million, 57 million deaths every year. I tell you, if you could walk up and down the hospitals of this world, and if you could be the consciousness of every person lying there, knowing for them that the invisible life of God is their life, they would spring up. The dead would rise out of their graves. These mortality charts would be overturned. We would discover why we have suffered needlessly throughout the centuries, confusing human life, a human bloodstream, with divine life, and never knowing that the life of the rose that dies is still alive as the life of the rose bush. The life of this body that dies wasn't us. We are the life of God, the eternal rose bush, ever giving life, ever sustaining life. We are not a dying rose. We are the Son of God. God is immortal. God has no human body. The Son of God is immortal. The Son of God has no human body. Immortality begets immortality. Non-physicality never begets physicality. Your invisible life is God, and also your invisible body. In order to experience your invisible life, you must live in your invisible body. For the infinite life of God flows through your infinite, invisible, mystical body. It is important to realize that your mortal life is only a sense of life and was not produced by the immortal life of God. It is important to know that the life substance of God did not produce your mortal body. Paul tells you that you have another body. You have a building of God not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Not made with hands means not made of human flesh and not visible, not material. You have an invisible building of God. You have an invisible body, Paul is saying. And it is not temporary, it is eternal in the heavens. And where are the heavens? The heavens are your Christ consciousness. In your consciousness of truth, you will discover you have an invisible body that lives forever. Now, the life of God formed this invisible body. And that invisible life of God flows through this invisible body. You have an invisible self with an invisible body and an invisible life. And meditate upon this with the realization of fact number 3. You have no other self than this one invisible life body self. Do not make the error of thinking that you are both visible and invisible. There is no such you. You are not the visible body. You are not the life of that body. The visible life, the visible body is not you. Because if it were, you would be separated from God. And therefore this comes to fact number 4. A beautiful fact. Dwell on it until you can shout again, yes, I agree. I understand. I feel it. And the fact is this. The life that dies is never you. It cannot be. The life that dies is not the life of God. You are the life of God. And the life of God is always alive. Don't wait to enjoy it 500 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 minutes from now. Acknowledge it in all your ways. Your invisible life and your invisible body are now alive and always will be. And this invisible life will always be your permanent divine source for everything you need, just like the blood in your veins nourishes the body. Your invisible life acknowledged, believed, lived in, accepted, worshipped, loved will be the substance invisibly of everything you need in the visible world. I, your invisible life, I, your invisible body, I, your invisible Christ self, I can never leave you. I am unlimited. I am completely unaffected by the conflicts of this world. And I am always here to remove those conflicts, if you will but acknowledge me as your life, and not the life of the visible form. As you daily learn to accept this invisible life, it will replace dying flesh. Literally. And then as you extend this truth to your children, to all who live within the scope of your visible eyes, to every nation, and realize that the invisible life of one is also the invisible life of the other, you will be in the one invisible life. And that one invisible life is your Savior, yourself, the life of all men, the Christ of the world. In Egypt, in Israel, in all of Africa, in England and in Ireland, wherever there are conflicts between men, it is because there is no one there to recognize, to live in, to experience the one invisible, infinite life that flows perfectly, sustaining the one invisible, infinite, mystical body of spirit. That doesn't mean that you're going to throw away this physical sense of life. You're going to see the human body in a different way, that's all. You're going to see it for what it really is. It's a guide, a measuring device. It's a map. You look at it, and it tells you the quality of your consciousness. It is a mirror of your consciousness. And in that mirror you see the conflicts. And they tell you that you are living in the wrong life. If you didn't have this mirror, this map, this guide, this body to look at, you would never be able to locate your problem. But the minute the body shows forth some problem, whatever it is, whether it's in the body itself or its relationship with other people or the emotions that run through the body, whatever, your map is telling you, get back to your consciousness. That's where it's coming from. And now when you get back to the consciousness, you find a secret. That consciousness is separated from God. It doesn't know God aright. It's a human consciousness. It's a sitting duck for world thought. It's reacting. It's hypnotized. It's actually asleep. And in its sleep it is dreaming because it cannot control the dream. And that's the value of your body. It brings you back to that consciousness which is sleeping and allowing the body to live in these conflicts. And when you get to transcend that consciousness by knowing that you are the life of God, that these things in the body are not yours, these temporary problems are not yours, this temporary body is not yours, you're not going to need it someday, you know. And the sooner you learn that the only reason you have it is to help you purify your consciousness, the more grateful you will be for it, and the more intelligently you will use it.